Hi, everyone, and welcome back to Wednesdays with Welch. This is State Senator Jim Welch, and we're very pleased this week to have someone that I've followed for many years now, both online, social media, and through his TED Talk and through other forms of, media. John O'Sullivan from Changing the Game Project, which is an organization that was founded by Mr. O'Sullivan and really focuses on the positivity of youth sports and how youth sports can be a very positive experience for everyone, including parents, adults, grandparents, and most especially the kids that are participating. And I know that I've read many of his stories and blogs over the years and have really got some great wisdom from that. So right now, John, welcome to Massachusetts, the Hampden district. We're out by, I represent the area of Springfield, West Springfield, and Chicopee in Western Mass. We're famous from the sports standpoint for the Basketball Hall of Fame. So that gives you a little bit of kind of a geographical point of where we are. But John, I just wanted to give you a minute or a couple minutes to share with our audience, who you are, how you got to where you are, and maybe a little bit of your background.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me on. I know Springfield area well. Spent 4 years coaching soccer at the University of Vermont and drove down through there many times. And actually had one of my favorite players was from the Springfield area.
Oh,
Um,
maybe.
so uh, yeah. Well, his dad, Ron Dias, is a big coach there been there for many, many years.
Okay.
And his name's Mike. But anyway, yeah. So I started this organization, Changing the Game Project, about 8 years ago as a parent myself, as a longtime coach, just trying to say, hey, can we bring a little bit more sanity to youth sports and high school sports, and also just an understanding. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. And so can we bring a little more understanding of, well, what's the truth? How as a parent can I support my son or my daughter's journey in sports? And how as a coach can I become the type of coach that kids want? And so now here we are 8 years later. Like you said, we have a blog. We have about 3 years into a podcast called Way of Champions. And I just published my second book back in December.
Congratulations.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, that's awesome. So University of Vermont, my oldest sister is a graduate of University of Vermont back in 1982, I think it was. So I don't
Yeah.
know. It was probably before the times that you got there, but
Yeah.
talking about sports, and I think it's an ideal time to talk about youth sports because as we're coming out of COVID-19 pandemic, quarantine, shutdown of youth sport activities and venues. I've read some articles where people have said, hey, it's a perfect time for us to really kind of maybe hit the reset button, so to speak, about how we approach youth sports and how we can give it back to the kids. And I know in a lot of your writings and your talks, you focus about just that, taking youth sports and really giving it back to the kids. Can you expand on that a little bit and what that really means?
Sure. I mean, our mission at Changing the Game Project is putting a little more play and play ball. And I think when I think about growing up, I grew up on Long Island. And, when I was growing up, it was me and my friends playing against, other friends. And we competed and we had fun and we went to school together. And when we got into high school, we kind of branched off and followed our own paths. And some guys played college hockey and some guys played soccer and some were wrestlers and golfers and all these different sports. And now we have this massive rush, I think, to sort of adultify youth sports at a really, really young age. And so what's happened is we've had the demise of in-town leagues and local leagues, local sport experiences, and sport has become this really high cost, high commitment at a very young age. And for a tiny percentage of kids, maybe that's a good thing. But for a lot of families and a lot of kids, it's not exactly what they want. And especially now, post pandemic, when we have many people who have either reduced income or loss of income, who won't be able to afford this commitment or this time. Or I think, this opportunity for this reset is, for me and my own children, we've never had so many nights of dinner in a row, right? Where we're just home every night. And I think a lot of families are saying, wow, maybe we need to get off the hamster wheel a little bit and not cut out sport, but just cut back. And instead of trying to do 3 sports year round all the time, let's have a little more normalcy and family time in our lives. And so this is this great time for this reset button, because this was the reset that no one thought we would ever get. And we just got it. And I hope we don't waste the opportunity.
Mm, I agree, and your point about the dinner table is I think a lot of people have been a lot of families have been experiencing that, especially sports families. Having a meal rather than driving through the drive-through at Dunkin' Donuts at 6:30 to get our breakfast. It's we're actually having breakfast and lunch sometime and dinner sometimes together, which is I think just a valuable experience. So great point. And so how do we do it? There's going to be resistance no matter when we start to get back into the youth sports and the regular way of things. Of course, there's many people out there that think maybe like you or maybe like me, but there's plenty of folks, adults especially out there that really just want to get right back into it and really start treating youth sports like professional sports. And how do we fight that, or how do we
Yeah.
urge them to come on our side?
Well, first of all, I think look at the research, right? There's no research that exists outside of maybe gymnastics and figure skating that says going all in on one sport really, really young is the path to elite performance. What all the research says is that that's a path to higher injury rates, higher burnout rates, higher dropout rates, and of course, higher costs and commitments. So, like, I love competitive sports and it's great, but it has to come with a balance. This guy, David Epstein, wrote a great book about, I think it came out last year, called Range: Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World. And it's all about the research in sport and academic and all these places, why being a generalist early on sets you up for far greater success on the long term. So what we encourage parents to do is, if you're taking the long view, right, if you want to have the best 11-year-old baseball player, then by all means only play baseball. But if you want your child to have the best chance of being not only an excellent baseball player, but still loving and playing baseball when he's 18, then you got to take the long view, right? Which is less baseball early on, more multi-movement, more training, less chance for burnout, taking time off to rest so you don't blow out your arm. All these sort of things are really, really important. And as David Epstein said to me, he was living in New York City at the time. He said, John, there's a group of 7-year-old travel soccer team that trains at a park right by my house. He says, I have a really hard time believing that a group of 7-year-olds can't get a game in a city of 10 million people. Right. And I love that quote, because this is it. It's not that there's never a time for travel hockey or travel soccer or whatever, but we spend more time in the car than we do actually playing. And use the time better. Just stay local early, and then when the time's right and your child's commitment and their love and their ownership of it is right, then take the jump. But don't be in such a hurry.
Yeah, and one thing I've noticed, and I'm sure you've seen it far more than I have in different areas of the country, is if, come 7, 8, 9 years old, if a kid hasn't displayed what in some people's eyes might be true natural ability, some adults and members of the boards of these organizations discourage the kids from playing. And I can't think of any other area of our life where we discourage kids from participating. In school, I mean, if a kid doesn't get math, we don't discourage him from doing math. If a kid can't play the trumpet right away, we don't discourage him or her from playing the trumpet. Why do we do that with sports?
Yeah.
What's the story with that?
Yeah, it's right. We don't just say to some 7-year-old, oh, he's not a reader, forget about that, right? We say, no, let's jump in there. And so we have to first remember that movement, right? So first of all, fundamental movement before sports skill. These are skills, and a skill can be learned. And the research is abundantly clear that prior to about the age of 16, when we are selecting our all-stars, right? When we're making tryouts and we're cutting kids, what we're actually doing is usually selecting the older kids. So in your kids play hockey, in that example, there's tons of research that if the cutoff date is January 1st for your new hockey year, the vast majority of your AAA hockey players are going to be born in January, February, and March. And there might not be any November, December kids. Now, does that mean kids that are born that month are genetically predispositioned to not be good at hockey? No. It just means that they're a year younger. And when you're 11, 12 months at the age of 7, 8, 9 is a massive difference. Those of us who have kids who are great apart, you just watch them growing up physically, emotionally, maturity-wise, concentration and focus-wise. And so we have to realize that the earlier we tier kids, the more likely we are to get it wrong. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the calls that we make to coaches a lot is, because we're making cuts so young, because we're picking A teams and B teams so young, you're really only selecting talent to win 6 months from now. You're not selecting the long-term kids. And would you coach differently if you assumed that all your selections were wrong instead of assuming that they're all right? Right? We all assume that, oh yeah, I got the best 12-year-olds. I'm really good at this. But there's no evidence that anyone in the world is good at selecting 12-year-olds or 10-year-olds.
Mm. And what advice because I see it all the time. My kids play soccer, baseball, hockey, try and keep them well-rounded and, whatever they want to try and do. But to your point, I've always thought the best coach is the coach that can take the kid who doesn't know how to play and teach him or her how to play. But it seems to be like the coaches and some of the adults in the situation want to skip over that whole instructional period and really get into the competition. And as a coach, I guess maybe this question's more for me. How do you, because I feel like I'm alone sometimes, and believe me, there's plenty of great people out there coaching and they feel the same way. But oftentimes, if you're the person that takes the instructional point of view, sometimes you're kind of pushed aside. How can I make that point, or how can people make that point that instruction, especially at the very early ages, is important?
Well, like you were mentioning school before, right? If the English teacher looked at the kids who struggled with reading and said, I forget about them, let's just go for the ones who already got it, we'd never find that acceptable, right? And so I think the biggest thing is, where coaches can be helped is by their local league or by their sport governing body, creating some sort of regulations that make sure at the youngest ages, all kids are given a chance. Mm-hmm. So what I mean by that is, I do a lot of work in other countries. And for example, Belgium in soccer has been an incredibly successful #1 ranked team in the world right now. And one of the things that they do in Belgium is, instead of playing soccer in halves, they play quarters. And any kid who, there's no substitutions allowed in the quarter. But any kid who doesn't play the first quarter has to play the second. If they don't play the second, they have to play the third. So it basically guarantees that every kid plays half a game. And the coach has no choice about that. So now, if I have to get this kid in no matter what, do I coach him or her differently? Yes, I do. Right? Because I want to do well. I'm competitive. There's nothing wrong with that. But if this kid has to play, then I have to pour into that kid, and instead of just sticking him in deep roving right field and giving him his minimum 1 at bat. Right. And so I'm not saying that you take a 7-year-old who's afraid of the baseball and put him at first base and get him hurt, but you got to give him a chance in the infield. Right. You got to let him hit. You got to give this chance. And this is taking the long view, and especially at the local level, especially at the little league level. This is where, I think if you pick them, you got to play them, and you got to pour into that kid, because you just don't know. And maybe he doesn't have a dad that plays catch with him in the backyard. Right. Maybe he doesn't have access to facilities. Maybe this is his first year, but there's a lot of untapped potential and a fire burning in that kid. And that's when coaching is great, right? When you take a kid on a journey to a place they've never been before and they never would have thought they could have got there. That's when it's most fulfilling, I think.
Right. And you see it click with them at some point, and the confidence just builds. But if they never get that chance, if an adult is telling them from very early on that this isn't for you, they're never going to find out what their true potential is.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned cuts, and I know that there's different points of view on all these different things. And of course, I think when I was a kid, really cuts started in high school. That's when things got real, so to speak. I mean, there were some travel sports, but if you wanted to try out for high school, you knew that you were gonna potentially get cut. Is there a recommended age or age group that is okay for cut? I mean, for example, part of the reason I started following you was there was an issue where an organization cut first graders from playing.
Mm-hmm.
And it just didn't sit well with me. It didn't sit well with a lot of people in the community. And trying to move past that, what is an okay age to have to ask kids to try out for a team and then cut them? I'm assuming first grade, second grade, third grade is really not the age to do that.
Yeah, and so it's always there's no perfect answer for that because it depends on your sport. It depends on your facility access, right? If I have a cross country team, I can have every kid race or run, and I can keep as many as I want. If I have a volleyball team, right, I only have a limited amount of courts and a limited amount of hours. So what I highly encourage is, early on, we want to keep as many kids as possible in sport for as long as possible. We want to create the best environment for them to play, right? That's what we should want as a society. That's what we should want as an organization. Now, that doesn't mean every kid needs to make the travel hockey team, but have a house league. So, hey, this is not your level yet, but here's a place for you to play. Number two, when the kids are really young, it's okay to sometimes tier them, that this is the top group, this is the next group, this is the next group. But when you tier them, you can't make that a self-fulfilling prophecy. So you have to give every group access to great coaching. You have to give them access to facilities. You have to give them the ability to also advance. And then this freedom, this potential freedom of movement, because what about the kid that grows 4 inches or gets coordinated all of a sudden? So telling kids in first grade, sorry, you can't play basketball, to me, that makes no sense. And if I was the varsity basketball coach in that district at the high school, I'd be like, please don't cut first graders. Please don't cut third graders, right? Because what are you doing to my program? And you talk to any athletic director and they'll tell you there's some 6'6" kid walking the hall who doesn't play basketball because he got cut in third grade. Right. And so this is this short-sighted look at stuff. So it doesn't mean that we can't ask kids to compete hard. It doesn't mean that we can't put them with like-minded kids who get it, but it can't become this self-fulfilling prophecy that in first grade or second grade, these are the chosen ones and these kids are the forgotten ones, because you just miss way, way too many potential athletes.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you've heard this phrase quite often, but when we do discuss, youth sports, the phrase, well, not everyone can get a trophy, or, well, why don't we give everybody a trophy argument? And it's just an argument that, it's, to me, just kind of makes my skin crawl a little bit. Because it's really talking about the participation and encouraging participation, especially amongst our young kids to play. How do you, I don't want to say push back, but how can you kind of reframe that? I mean, because I love competition. You've
Mm-hmm.
played sports at the high, really high levels, coached at Division I soccer. How do you kind of take that, well, we can't give everybody a trophy type attitude and really turn it into something positive?
Well, first of all, I completely disagree with participation awards. I think I think that money could be far better spent on scholarships to get kids playing than
Mm.
getting kids little trophies or medals that don't really mean a lot. And I think, the that quest for extrinsic rewards, most kids couldn't really care less whether there's a trophy or not at the end of it. It's a nice thing. I wish, what I've seen some organizations do is they have their core character values that they are teaching, right? So you sign up for our soccer and we're teaching you about respect and integrity and hard work, whatever that is, right? And then at the end of the season, they might give them like a little coin or a medal for learning and living those values, right? So now we've attached this piece of hardware to something bigger than, oh, your parents were capable of filling out the registration form. So I think that's important. I think a lot of people use that, oh, you're just the trophies for everyone argument as it's a conversation ender, right?
Mm.
Because that's not what people are asking for at all. Um, there's a difference between showing up to compete and showing up to win. And, when my business partner, Dr. Jerry Lynch, and I work with college teams, when we work with professional teams, when we advise those coaches, all the best coaches out there, and this is what my new book was about, was like they're focused on the process. They focus on show up and compete your very best, because when you're focused on competing, you're focused on what do I control?
Mm.
And I control my effort, my focus. I control my preparation. I feel confident. I don't feel stressed. So a lot of parents and coaches focus on show up to win,
Mm.
right? And now all of a sudden, think about all the things that affect whether you win that are out of your control: the referee, the weather, the field. The opponent could have the most amazing pitcher, or the hockey team could have the most incredible goaltender, and you're not going to win. But it doesn't mean that you can't develop in the process. And so, I think sport is about showing up and competing your best every day. And sometimes you have the physical talent on top of that to win, and sometimes you don't. But if you show up enough days in a row and compete really hard, you're going to get better.
Mm.
And there's so many stories about, the local team that, went 1-22 at hockey when they were 7 and won a state championship in high school as seniors, because they focused on getting better every day. And so I just think this is, as a parent, my kid's not turning pro, your kid's not turning pro. Let's focus on these things that, hey, work hard, be a good teammate, work well with others, respect the game, respect your opponents, be honest, sprint to the line and touch the line, don't turn short, right? All these little things that go far beyond sport that play well in real life. Because even if they're really good, like we all end up in the bar league anyway. So
that's my life, especially in hockey. I mean, a lot of us hockey dads,
yeah,
we start tearing the kid, the kids start getting teared, and we always tiered or whatever have you, which is fine because you want to have them at the, against, proper competition level. But we all say they all end up in the same place in men's league anyway. So
exactly.
um, but we got just a couple more minutes. One thing, and you had mentioned it early in the conversation, was the kind of the disappearance in not drastic, but slow disappearance of local rec teams, park and rec, or non-travel teams, which of course takes away parents and families' abilities to, in some cases, get their kids involved with sports. And when they do make the next step up to a travel organization, it all of a sudden becomes a very business transaction oriented type situation. And I've been doing a lot of, you know, more than I would about it, but youth sports is a huge business. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of money spent on youth sports, and in the ripple effect, thereof, from traveling and restaurants and hotels and whatnot. Um, do you feel as though there should be more regulation of some of these private youth sports organizations, or is it really more about educating people to get them to try and live up to what, maybe I would feel is their responsibility? And I'm not singling out any organization. I'm just talking in general, because I'm sure it happens everywhere, every corner of the country. Um, but there's money involved. There's a lot of decisions. It's really more of a business type situation, and it can be eye-opening for those parents who may be in families that don't really take sports to that level, but that's the only way they can get their kid involved.
I mean, sort of two parts to that question. I think number one, I think we can take this carrot and stick approach, and so it's very helpful when sport governing bodies on a national level, right? So through the U.S. Olympic Committee, every Olympic sport has a national governing body, and the ones that have done the best job mandating a few things while at the same, given the carrot approach, if you do it well, we'll support you. Those ones do it best, right? We're not a country where people like a lot of central regulation. And so to come in and mandate a ton of things is really hard. But I think a perfect example is USA Ice Hockey, who 10, 12 years ago started their ADM. And at that point, and that's when they went to cross ice hockey for young kids, they started a lot more skill training. They got rid of checking under 12. And everyone said, the sky is falling. We're not going to be competitive. We're not going to create good players anymore, things like that. And what USA Hockey found is that back when they started that, only about 60% of their 9-year-olds were still playing hockey at the age of 14. And now I think it's about 94%. So they're keeping kids in the game. And guess what? We're still winning medals. We're winning medals at the junior level. So we're producing better, more skillful hockey players at the same time that we're keeping more kids in the game. And so they're just a great example of, hey, let's mandate a few things, and it works well. Then, number two, I think the real challenge is, I hope that organizations in your district, whether it's the local parks department or the city or the town that runs local sports, the YMCA, the Boys and Girls Club, that they're ready for an influx of kids, because there's going to be families that can't keep this level of commitment, and they're going to come looking for the local league. And my greatest fear is that many local leagues are going to roll back out the same old program that was failing before. I think also what I've learned during this pandemic from some people is that a lot of city-run leagues have no incentive to grow, right? Because I had a friend who grew, almost doubled the size in 5 years of his local programming, and created this incredible program where coaches came back and referees came back, and the sideline culture was great. And then he lost his job because the city said, we don't want this many kids in our program, right? And this is what scares me, right? Is that people will say, oh, sorry, you know what? We have spots for 500 kids, so you 500, other 500, tough luck. And then now those kids have no place to go. So I hope that the people in your district are listening and saying, be ready for an influx of kids, educate your coaches, right? Don't just hand them the 20-year-old PDF, give them some good stuff, teach them about the kids they're going to coach, be creative in your programming and scheduling your fields or your whatever it is, in case there's more kids there, and really say, hey, we have an opportunity to reclaim local sport. And that's our obligation as a government or a parks department, right? It's not an afterthought. And I hope the ones who do that are going to do great.
Well, I think it's great advice, and I certainly hope every town, every municipality, or every community across the country can really bring it back up again, because as participation levels are just at abysmal in terms of youth sports, and any success that we can have getting that many more kids involved. I kind of look at it like a funnel. You want as many kids in the top of the funnel as possible. And as time goes on, some will decide that they don't like it. Some will decide that they like it, or they'll move on to something else. But,
Hmm.
limiting the top of the funnel in the beginning to me is just, is just the wrong, game plan.
Hmm.
So I know you've spent a lot of time with us today. I really appreciate it. I really respect what you're doing, your organization, Changing the Game Project. I know you have several, forms of media out there, your TED Talk. I know as you said, you just had your second book published. Um, if I'll give you, when we'll put up the information about, how to get in touch with you and whatnot on our little page. But you want to just take a minute and just kind of wrap up and, maybe just hit on some of the key highlights you think are important for anybody who might be watching at home.
Sure, yeah. So I would say, first of all, just the mothership is changingthegameproject.com. And if you go there, you can find my book, Changing the Game, or Every Moment Matters, or the TED Talk, or the podcast, or things like that. Here's my final thoughts. As we return to play from this time off, from this pandemic, please remember, as parents, and I live in Oregon now, and we're a couple weeks into this, and the look and the joy on the kids' faces when they got to see their teammates face to face for the first time versus virtually has been amazing. Um, so as a parent, just and as a coach, remember what you do in these next couple of weeks is not going to win you a World Cup or a Stanley Cup or anything. A lot of the kids are not fit, even though they said they were working out. A lot of the kids, they're barely getting out of their houses. Some of them are coming from really bad situations at home. They've been socially cut off. They might be in abusive situations. So much stuff is going on, Senator. And so I think just remember that this is your time as a coach. This is your time as a parent to say, we have no idea what these kids have been through. And so let's just focus on the joy of being back out there and running around with your friends and seeing each other. And the composer Ben Zander has this great thing. He says, if their eyes are shining, you're doing it right. So just make sure their eyes are shining at the end of every day and you're doing it right.
Absolutely, and great advice. And I think that's what everybody wants, but it's just, trying to get everybody on the same track to providing that experience for kids is, maybe we've lost our way a little bit over the years, and myself included. I consider myself somebody that needs to continually learn and really, focus on, youth sports is about the kids and, the enjoyment and the
Me
competition.
too.
Yeah.
Me too. Every day I've done the same. There's nothing that I write about that I haven't done wrong myself.
Right. Well, making mistakes, that's what it's all about, especially in sports, making mistakes and learning from them and trying not to repeat them again. So, John O'Sullivan, I want to thank you for coming on. Changing the Game Project, just an awesome, awesome organization that really sends a really, really tremendous message for parents, for administrators in youth sports, and it's all really focused on trying to bring it back to the kids and making sure that what we're doing as adults, I think, is really in the best interest of all the kids that are participating. So, John, thanks again for coming on. I really appreciate it, and good luck with everything that you're doing, and hopefully we'll cross paths again at some point. And again, great work. Keep up the great work.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Thank you.